Welcome to Twisted Fiction, the channel where nightmares come to life. Prepare yourself for a journey into the macabre and the unknown, where every story is more terrifying than the last. Join us, if you dare, and let Twisted Fiction be your guide into the world of horror. Subscribe now, and remember, every story has a twist, and every twist will leave you breathless. A blunt ending.
The town had always been quiet. Nestled between rolling hills and thick forests, it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the biggest scandal was the occasional high school romance. But that was before the disappearances started. When Sally Miller vanished on her way home from the grocery store, people chalked it up to a runaway teen. But when Mr. Thompson didn't return from his evening jog, the whispers began. Then, just a week ago, the police found Claire Peters' body in the woods, her head caved in with what they assumed was a blunt object. Fear settled over the town like a thick fog. I tried to push the dread out of my mind as I walked home from the late shift at the diner. My boots crunched on the gravel road, and the moon cast long shadows that danced eerily in the breeze. Every creak and rustle set my nerves on edge. I regretted turning down Susie's offer for a ride, but I needed the walk to clear my head after a long day. A twig snapped behind me, and I whirled around. My heart pounded in my chest, but there was nothing there, just the dense trees and the whispering wind. I picked up my pace, the uneasy feeling growing stronger with every step. The old Miller barn loomed ahead, abandoned and decaying. I usually cut through the field next to it as a shortcut, but tonight the place seemed to exude a sinister presence. I hesitated, then shook my head. Just nerves, I told myself. I stepped off the road and onto the narrow path leading past the barn. Halfway through the field, I heard it. Footsteps, faint but unmistakable, coming from behind me. I turned, my breath hitching. A shadowy figure stood at the edge of the field, just beyond the barn. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and even from this distance, I could see the glint of metal in his hand. A hammer. My stomach dropped, and I broke into a run. Panic surged through me, adrenaline propelling my legs faster than they'd ever moved. The footsteps behind me grew louder, closer. I dared not look back, focusing solely on the faint glow of my house lights in the distance. My foot caught on a root, and I stumbled, falling hard on my hands and knees. Pain shot up my arms, but I scrambled to my feet, heart racing. The footsteps were nearly upon me. I forced myself to keep moving, even as the pain throbbed in my legs. I could hear his breathing now, heavy and labored. The hammer clinked ominously with every step. Desperation fueled my flight, and I burst through the tree line, my house just a few yards away. The porch light flickered like a beacon of hope. I reached the door, fumbling with the keys, my hands trembling uncontrollably. The footsteps stopped. I glanced over my shoulder and saw him standing at the edge of the yard, the moonlight catching the glint of a mask on his face. The mask was a grotesque thing, twisted into a permanent, sadistic grin. I jammed the key into the lock and flung the door open, throwing myself inside and slamming it shut. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, listening. Silence. My mind raced. Was he gone? I crept to the window and peeked through the curtain. He was gone. Relief washed over me, and I sagged against the wall, sliding down to sit on the floor. I was safe. Or so I thought. A creak sounded from the hallway. My breath caught in my throat. I looked up and froze. The masked man stood at the end of the hall, the hammer dangling loosely from his hand. How had he gotten in? My mind screamed at me to move, to do something, but my body refused to obey. He started towards me, slow, deliberate steps echoing in the silent house. I scrambled to my feet, looking for something, anything to defend myself with. My eyes landed on the kitchen, and I bolted towards it, grabbing the largest knife I could find. He was closer now, the mask's grotesque smile seeming to widen. I backed into the corner, clutching the knife, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. "Stay back," I screamed, brandishing the knife. He paused, tilting his head as if considering my words, then lunged. I swung the knife wildly, catching his arm. He grunted but didn't stop. His free hand shot out, grabbing my wrist and twisting it until I cried out in pain, the knife clattering to the floor. I kicked and struggled, but his grip was iron. He raised the hammer, and I saw my reflection in the cold, merciless steel. This was it. My end. "Please," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. But his eyes, visible through the mask's eye holes, were devoid of mercy. The last thing I saw was the hammer descending, the final blow that plunged my world into darkness.
Divine Father Jacob's.
St. Mark's Church stood on the outskirts of the small village of Dunwich, its steeple piercing the sky like a solemn sentinel. The village had always been a tranquil place, and at its heart was Father Jacob, the vicar of St. Mark's. He was a man of God, revered by his congregation for his piety and wisdom. His sermons were the glue that held the community together, and his benevolent smile seemed to offer solace to all who sought it. But behind closed doors, Father Jacob was a different man. Haunted by voices he believed to be divine, he was convinced that he was chosen by God for a higher purpose. These voices spoke to him in the dead of night, filling his mind with a dark, fervent zeal. It began with Sister Mary. She had been a faithful servant of the church, but Father Jacob had noticed her wavering devotion. One night, as the village slept, he invited her to the rectory under the pretense of discussing church matters. "Father, it's late. What is it you wish to speak about?" Sister Mary asked, her voice tinged with concern. Father Jacob's eyes gleamed with a fervor that made her uneasy. "Sister Mary, I have received a message from God. He has shown me your doubts, your lack of faith. I am here to guide you back to his light." Sister Mary took a step back, fear creeping into her heart. I don't understand." With swift precision, Father Jacob grabbed her arm, pulling her close. "Fear not, sister. This is God's will." He whispered a prayer, his grip tightening as he produced a knife hidden beneath his robes. With a swift, brutal motion, he silenced her cries forever. The next Sunday, Father Jacob led the congregation in prayer, his voice steady and serene. No one noticed the faint, dark stains on his robe. The village mourned Sister Mary's disappearance, but Father Jacob reassured them, saying she had gone on a spiritual retreat to atone for her sins. The voices grew louder, more insistent. Father Jacob saw sinners everywhere, the young couple living in sin, the old man who never attended church, the shopkeeper who worked on Sundays. Each night, he donned his dark robes and carried out what he believed to be God's work. Mr. Thompson was his next target. An elderly man who openly questioned the church's teachings, he was deemed a heretic. One evening, as Mr. Thompson sat by the fire, there was a knock at his door. He opened it to find Father Jacob standing there, holding a Bible. "Good evening, Mr. Thompson. May I come in?" Father Jacob asked, his voice smooth and inviting. Mr. Thompson, surprised but not suspicious, nodded and stepped aside. "Of course, Father. What brings you here?" Father Jacob stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I am here to offer you a chance at redemption, Mr. Thompson. A chance to confess your sins and save your soul." Mr. Thompson frowned, suspicion creeping into his eyes. "I have nothing to confess, Father." Father Jacob sighed, shaking his head. "That is not what God tells me. With a swift, practiced movement, he pulled a length of cord from his robes and wrapped it around Mr. Thompson's neck, tightening it with a strength that belied his age. The old man struggled, his eyes wide with terror, but Father Jacob's grip was unyielding. As life drained from Mr. Thompson, Father Jacob whispered, "Go to God, repentant sinner." The next morning, the village awoke to the news of Mr. Thompson's sudden passing. Father Jacob led the funeral service, his voice filled with sorrow and compassion. No one suspected the vicar of any wrongdoing. He was, after all, a man of God. But as the bodies piled up, so did the suspicions. Whispers began to circulate, and the once tight-knit community grew fearful and paranoid. It was young Emily, a devout girl with a keen sense of observation, who first voiced her concerns to her parents. "Father Jacob, he always seems to be near when someone disappears or dies," she said, her voice trembling. Her parents dismissed her worries, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Emily decided to take matters into her own hands. One night, she followed Father Jacob, keeping to the shadows as he left the rectory and made his way to the woods. What she saw chilled her to the bone. In a clearing, illuminated by the pale moonlight, Father Jacob knelt beside a freshly dug grave, whispering fervent prayers. Beside him lay another villager, lifeless and cold. Emily ran back to the village, her heart pounding. She gathered a small group of trusted friends, and together, they confronted Father Jacob at the church. He was in the middle of a sermon when they burst in, their faces pale with fear and determination. "Father Jacob," Emily called out, her voice steady despite her terror. "We know what you've been doing." The congregation gasped, turning to look at their beloved vicar. Father Jacob's eyes darkened, the serene mask slipping to reveal the madness beneath. "You do not understand," he hissed. "I am doing God's work. I am purging this village of sin." With a roar, he lunged at Emily, but the villagers were ready. They overpowered him, tying him up and dragging him to the town square. The evidence of his crimes was irrefutable, and the once revered vicar was cast out, awaiting judgment from higher authorities. The village of Dunwich was forever changed. The dark shadow of Father Jacob's deeds hung over them, a stark reminder of the evil that can lurk behind even the most benevolent faces. The church was cleansed and consecrated anew, but the scars remained, a testament to the horrors committed in the name of God.